Hello and welcome to the Adelaide.net user group. My name is David Gardner and I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. Bill Chesnut is a Cloud Platform and API Evangelist at SixPivot with 35 years of experience across multiple industries. He's also a Microsoft MVP. It's great to have Bill back presenting to the group again on the topic tonight of Azure Managed Service Identities. Thanks, Bill.
We're going to look at getting started with the Azure Managed Service Identity. And the biggest benefit for this we'll see is getting rid of secrets in our connection strings and things like that. So here's just a little bit about me. I've got this a little bit later on in the deck too. I don't have many slides. I'm going to spend more of my time actually demoing the code. So the agenda is just a little bit about a history. Some talk about security and the groups and stuff that I tend to recommend that you set up, a little bit about the tokens, and then mostly demo around basically making sure that we have everything that we need to make this work. Now, one of the things I have found out with this is there's a lot of stuff that you have to do up front. Very little stuff you actually have to do in your code, which is a good thing and a bad thing a little bit, because a lot of times the security stuff is stuff that you can't set up yourself and have to get other people involved. So with the history, we kind of go back to where we've always had to have this information about how we connect to our resources. So tonight we're going to look at things like SQL, Service Bus, and storage, and all of those things about how we would normally connect. Sometimes we were able to get away with using the Windows authentication, so it could pass through some of that, or we could use a particular service principal in either on premises or in Azure to basically have that information that we needed to connect to those particular resources. So Microsoft introduced the Managed Service Identity a few months ago, or not, it's not a few months ago now, it's probably 18 months ago now. And they've been rolling it out to more and more services. So that's the good thing. And we'll see that there's a couple of things I'm going to cover off that kind of are just kind of base things that we want to talk about that really don't affect as much how your code works, but it just makes it easier to do a few things. So the big key to this is getting rid of those secrets in our configuration data. One of the things that we have to kind of do from start is that we could do everything based on the managed service identity of our application. So say a function or a logic app or a web app. But what I find is that if I try to grant permission to each one of those things, I sometimes have issues that, okay, for some reason I need to delete my function and recreate it. And when I do that, the managed service identity, the name stays the same, but sometimes the ID underneath the covers changes, and I have to do some work around that. I'm not going to cover this tonight, but I do have some PowerShell scripts that when you deploy something into Azure in your deployment template, it can grab the managed service identity from the ARM template and then passes it as an output variable of the ARM template, and then a PowerShell script can pick it up and add that to a group. And that's the approach that I take on most things. So let me hop over real quick to my groups. So don't get too scared to start with. What I've done is I've kind of set up a set of groups for both our dev environment and a test environment. So you'll see that I have admins, so I can have a group of admins that are across both dev and test. So I put those groups into there. Then I have admins for dev, admins for tests. So what this also helps is that now if I'm working in an environment, I no longer have to make sure that I have the keys somewhere, I have all of the secrets somewhere. people can just use their Azure AD credentials to get into all of these things. And then what I've done is I'm also using app config, and I only have one instance of app config, and that goes across my dev and my test. So I have a config reader and a config writer. So there's few things that sometimes want to write stuff back into app config, and that'll mostly be my deployment scripts and my Azure DevOps service connections. Then I have my MSI readers for dev, MSI reader for test, and then MSI writer for test and MSI writer for dev. And I've split those up because sometimes I only need to give somebody permission to read SQL. I'm not updating SQL, just give them their minimum permissions, give them a read. Sometimes I just need to be able to read out of a storage account or things like that. So what I've done is if you look at those are all the different groups. If I go here and just pick up one of the reader dev and go to the members, I've got a function app out there deployed, and I've got its MSI in that group. So basically that means that anything that's set up with that can use that. And if we go look now, I've got, and this is I've got a lot of stuff in the resource group because I've put both my dev and my test in there, just more to be able to show it than the way I would do it probably in a production type thing. I would do dev and test in separate resource groups, but it was just easier to show here. So if we go look at our, say, a service bus namespace, we can go in and look at the access control and look at our role assignments. And what you'll see there is I have those groups. I don't have the individual application that I'm going to be using. I have that group in there so that I can give people receive permissions and send permissions based on that read and the write. So that was able to do that. Then I can go back and go into, say, my storage. Where's the storage account? And again, these now all support the role-based configuration. And you'll see down at the bottom, there's a blob storage data owner. So that's my writer. And there's my storage blob reader, which is my reader permissions. I can also, if I go here and click add a role assignment, you'll see that if I want to give somebody access to the, where is it? So storage blob, here's the storage queue and things like that, and the storage file data. So I've got very granular permissions that I can use to set those up. So that's one of the nice things about the security is here, and we basically don't have to worry about having any secrets around, because when you have secrets that you're putting in your application, 9 out of 10 times they will end up in your source repository somehow. I know you don't want them there, and it's not a good thing to have them there, but they will end up there over time. So with this, I don't have to worry about it. So the next piece we want to go look at is I've got my app configuration set up. And if you're not familiar with app configuration, it's a application that you can stand up that basically gives you the ability to store everything that would normally be in your app settings.json or your settings, the web settings and things like that, and you store it in the app configuration under the Configuration Explorer. It allows you to basically put the things in there that you want, and you can also put labels on them. So you'll notice there are a couple of things that don't have labels. They say no label. That means those values are the same for both dev and test. So here with our storage account, what I'll do is I just want to copy this one And what I'll do is I'll add a value, and I'll go here and I'll make this one test, and I'll give it a label of test, apply that. And so you'll see, you'll be able to look at the values across your environments in one place. Now, if you have a secret that you want to put in here, because I'm not using any secrets in these demos because I've got everything done with Managed Service Identity, but what you can do is you can create a key vault link. And what that means is that you can point to the key vault that you have out there and any secrets that you have in key vault, and you can surface those through the app config. And I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute in the code, but that gives you kind of that central point of focus is your app config. And if you've got secrets, they will be in Key Vault as secrets. And everything else will be in app config so that you can see it and manage it across your environments. Let's hop back to the slides. Oh, wrong one. There we go. So that's the idea on the groups. You could do it with individual managed service identities, but I recommend groups. It just makes the whole process easier when you're adding devs and removing devs and you're adding applications to that. And what I'll do is I'm going to put some of this up on my GitHub repository, and I'll get David to send you the link, and I'll add those PowerShell scripts in there if you're interested in those. Now, tokens. Some of our resources for the managed service identity will require us to create a token. Now, we'll see in the code that most of the resources that I want to access generate their own tokens behind the scenes for us, and they take care of all that. SQL's one of them that you do need to generate a token for. And one of the things I do, and I'll show in the code, is the tokens, the token lifetime can be set. And what I do to make the access more efficient is I cache that token in my code. I know when its expiry date is, and then I only go out and get a new token when that particular token expired. We will automatically get a new token if we restart our app because it's a local cache. And again, that works if I scale out too. So if I have a function running in a premium app service or premium consumption plan and it scales out to 10 instances, every instance will get one when it spins up. And you'll see that I go out, I set the context of this to database.windows.net, and then go out and use the default Azure credentials. Now, there's a whole set of these default credentials. One of the things that I'm still struggling a little bit with, I should be able to log on to my Visual Studio into Azure, and it uses my Visual Studio credentials to do the managed service identity. I'm still having some issues with it, but I think it's more related to my ID than to the way it's supposed to work. I've got a problem with my ID because my SixPivot ID is in about 10 different Azure directories. 5 of them have multi-factor auth turned on, so sometimes when I log on, I go through about 6 iterations of multi-factor auth. So that's probably, I think, more related to that than anything there. So let's go ahead and, without any further ado, move on to really what we want to see is the code. So I put most of this code together already, and we're going to talk through some pieces of it, because I'll put this code up here on, like I said, on GitHub for everybody, because it's just a good starting point for a lot of things. And so let's hop into the code to start with. Now, let me see. Now, do I need to make that bigger? Let me just make it a little bit bigger, the code, so everybody can see it. So what I'm going to start with, this is an Azure function. And I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the new startups that you can have in the .NET 3.1 with Azure Functions. I use it fairly extensively. One of the things I use it for is to set up my configuration. So if I'm not using app config, I'm using appsettings.json and a local settings.json file to get my configuration in. And I do that on a normal basis, and I also will pick up any environment variables. The thing I want to add is here is in my appsettings.json, I have my app configuration, my endpoint, and my environment. So you remember that environment I had, you saw that there was dev, and then I added that value for test. So that basically, this tells which environment to go to. And that's the only thing I need to pass to my application. Everything else it will get from the app configuration. And that makes deployment thousands of times easier. I don't have to worry about munging the app settings file, things like that. So if we go back to the startup, you'll see that I go grab those two in, configuration settings, and then I check to make sure my endpoint's not null. And then I check to see if it starts with endpoint equal. Now, if I'm running locally and I don't have my credentials working, if I put endpoint equals, that is the connection string to app config that contains the keys and everything in it to make sure that it can get to it without the managed service identity. So that allows me to get to it. And then, but if I don't have endpoint in there, that means I only have in that is the HTTP and the name of my configuration. So then what I do is I go and get my default Azure credentials. And then basically I give it my endpoint URL and my credentials. And I also want to configure to pass my credentials through to Key Vault. So if I've got my app config referencing a Key Vault configuration, I need to pass my credentials through to that Key Vault. And then what I do is I select the filter that says, if my app config doesn't have a label on it, I want all of those because those are going to be common to all of my environments. And then I pick the one that is for this environment. And then basically that will load up all of my app configuration. So I don't have to worry about app configuration any longer. And again, because it's using those default Azure credentials, I don't have anything. Just I need to make sure that my function is in the app configuration reader group in Azure AD, and then that app configuration reader group is in the app configuration as a configuration reader. So if we go look at our configuration here, we go up to access control, go to role assignments, and what we'll see is that we have in the app configuration data owners is the writers, and app configuration data readers is the reader configuration. And if we go look at the MSI demo configuration readers, you'd see that my function app is in there. Now, the next thing we want to look at is how do I turn on MSI for my application? So if we go here to our function app that I've created, I didn't deploy any of this stuff through Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions or anything like that. It was just easier for the stuff I was doing. You'll notice we've got a down in the settings, there's identity. And basically what I did is I turned identity on and hit save. Now that will automatically go create something in the Azure AD with the name of MSI demo function dev. So I can go assign permissions to that. They also do support user assigned ones. So you can basically create your user in the background or have your security guys do it and then associate this function with that ID. So you can do a user assigned one. I haven't seen any real reason at the moment. I do know there was some people I was talking to that did have they had a security requirement that they had to assign them, use the user assigned ones. But as soon as that gets saved, if we go back here and look in our, let's see, config reader, go to members, add member, and then type, just filter that down by MSI. You'll see that I have my function, and then I have also, there's a logic app I started playing with that has a managed service identity associated with it, and I've added that. So if I go here and I select that guy, my config reader, I can now read configuration from my logic app. So let's go back to the function, or actually down into back into Visual Studio, so we can start looking at how all these pieces are hooked together. Now that's my startup. That gets everything set up. And I make a singleton out of my configuration, and then I've got my function here. I've very cleverly named it function 1, which is probably not what I wanted to do. I changed it from a static class, and I've added a constructor, and then you basically pass it the configuration. So it will automatically do that from that singleton that we created in the startup. It'll pass the configuration information to all of my functions. And then basically I can leverage that from any of the functions I want to do. So you'll see now I can go here and I can go get my SQL connection string. Now, normally my SQL connection string would contain my username and my password and all that stuff. If we go back to our app configuration where I've got that, which one do I have? I've already come off of that. Let's go back into Config Explorer. It hides the values when you first come up, so I can do a show value, and you'll see that my data source no longer has anything in it that needs to be secure. You'll see that it has my name of my database and the name of the server. That's it. Doesn't have anything else in it, and everything else is taken care of with the managed service identity. So I go out and I get that, and then basically I will go here, and what I do is this one it does it for databases that are running in Azure, but you can change this check if you want to do something different. It also checks to see if there's a user ID specified. But then what it does is it uses that connection string to create a new SQL connection. And then what I do is I've got a method in here that will go off and get my token. So what it does down here is that we've got a private static, which is my access token, which when the system comes up, I set that to a blank token. And then what I do is in here, if the token expires less than now or before now, it needs to generate a new token. It sets that token context, goes and gets the token using my default Azure credentials, basically sets my static token, and then returns the token dot, the actual text token out of the token back to the code. And then basically that adds that to my SQL connection. And then basically I just do a open connection, run my SQL command, and that generates my results. So if we go to our function, we can go here to the function. And of course, during a demo, it always takes forever to refresh these. Oh, come on, refresh. So to show some of the stuff, what I've done also is I've also wired up application insights, and I've got the live metrics panel turned on in application insights. So I can go back to my function, click on there, go to my code and test, and then go to test run. This particular one doesn't require a body, so it won't really make any difference, but I do a post and I click run on that. And it takes just a little while to do that, but I get a 200 response back. And if I go over here to my application insights, you'll see that I've got the, let's see, where did that should have come out, except that's the wrong time. Let me just do a transaction search and then back to live metrics. Yep, there it is. Now you'll also see that I'm doing stuff with blob storage, but I'm logging out all of that information so I can see it at real time, which a lot of people have shy away from App Insights because you can't see some of the real-time logging in it, but you can do that through the live metric window. So let's go on in that function now and look at, so that's SQL. So it's basically gone out there. If we looked at that, we would see a dependency on up here, probably not the first time, but there should be a dependency going out there to get that token for our SQL, and we'd see, I think I've got in the debugging piece here, let's see, that's the SQL. I should be putting out, there's, let's just run it one more time. And I'm actually outputting a lot more information. I'm putting out what the token. So actually we can see it at the bottom of this screen. We'll see here, existing SQL token expires 3/11. And so basically when it's going out to get that, it just returns that token because it's still valid. So let's go back into Visual Studio. And I guess this is a good point to just have a quick question session. Has anybody got questions about how I set that SQL up? Now, what I did is once I created the SQL instance, I went out there and I have it set up, and I should show this too. Let me just go grab that. If we go here and look at the demo and go into our SQL server for test and dev, you'll notice that I have Active Directory admin set up. So what you do is you go in there, you pick, in this case, you either pick the account that you want to be the admin or the group. I use a group on this, again, because we're going to have multiple people that want to get into SQL and do that. And once I do that, I log on as a member of that group, and then I run this little script that says, for my dev reader, make it a data reader of that database, and then for the writer, make it DB owner of that database. So I set up that connection, the security bits inside of SQL Server once it's created, and I only have to do that once. Then I can just add members to and remove members from that group. So let's go back to our function. So in there, I did my SQL query. Now what I want to do is I want to go to Service Bus, and I want to be able to go to Service Bus without doing any SAS tokens, because I really, really hate service bus SAS tokens. And the same thing with blob storage. I want to go write something to blob storage without having to worry about the tokens. So basically, I got those two examples. Did we have any questions? Okay, I haven't heard any questions, so I'll go on. And again, you can ping me on Twitter. It's BizTalkBill. It's a pretty easy one to remember. So what I did is send a service bus, send service bus topic message. I go down here and I do a very similar thing, is that I go and get my configuration for my endpoint and for my topic name. If we go look at those values in my app config, where'd it go? There it is. You'll notice that again, there's no secrets. There's no SAS token. There's nothing there. I have the endpoint, which is my MSI demo-dev service bus .windows.net. And normally you would have to go into service bus, create a token, and then get that token out, store it away in Key Vault, things like that. And then what I do in the code for service bus, very similar to the way I did the SQL one, except I don't have to, all I have to do is create a token provider for managed identity token provider. And then what I do is I check to see if my endpoint happens to have a shared access key, I use it. But if it doesn't have a shared access key in it, I basically use the endpoint, the topic name, and the token provider. It goes off, gets a token to talk to service bus. If my service bus didn't have my MSI group in it as a authorized, it would fail. So basically that takes care of doing that, creates my client, and then I can send messages. Now, the storage is pretty much the same. So basically what we do is we go off and grab the storage account and the container, and then create a container endpoint. And then when I want to create my blob client, I basically go there, give it the container endpoint and my default Azure credentials. It goes out there, takes my MSI, uses that to access there, creates the container if it doesn't exist, and then basically creates the blob, writes out the blob, catches any errors, writes them out if it has any errors from there. But basically what we can do is, if we go back to our example here, where our function's at, and if we go look at, let's go look here, that's where our, go look at our service bus namespace for dev, go look at our topic, and we'll see that we have 3 messages on there. I can click on that subscription. And if you're not familiar with the Service Bus Explorer, I can go there and I can receive the messages off there and see what the message looks like. And there's my message. And then I can keep receiving them with a destructive receive if I want. And then basically, if I've done that, then all of my messages will be gone. So if I go back one level here and do a refresh, you'll see I no longer have any messages in there. If I go and just open another window real quick, account. And we go to the storage account. go to its container, and we'll see that we've got 3 of them in there. If I select all 3 of those and delete those, I have none in there. So I have nothing in Service Bus, and I have nothing in my storage account. I go back to my function, I hit run, that's got a 200. Now I go back to my, let's go back to the storage account and do a refresh. So now you'll see a new one with the right time. We go back to our Service Bus topic and do a refresh, and there's a message count of 1 in there. So basically I've done that without doing any secrets or stored in Key Vault or in any of my configuration and things like that. So you can go and we can go out there and look if we want to. We go back to our function, go into, and I'm not sure how many people know you can do this, but you can go console and do a directory. And then there is a default app settings here. I think if we type it, nope, that's the one. So that's basically the app settings for my functions. And it's just got the MSI demo Azure app config and the environment. And if we go down to where function 1 is at, all we have is that function.json. And then back up in here in the bin directory is where our DLL will be. Or DLL, bin. There'll be a few other things that gets deployed as part of that, but there's no configuration or anything like that in there that would identify anything else in there. So it's all basically done through app settings and through the managed service identity. Now, we'll have a quick look at Logic Apps. I'm not sure how many of you guys are using Logic Apps, but what they've done recently is they've made a big push to make a lot of these connectors. So if I start with a blank Logic app, I'm just going to do one that's on a schedule. So basically it runs every, come on, you can do it. It's just being obstinate. But what they've done is they've just updated a bunch of the connectors in here. Why doesn't that want to go? Okay, let's just do a quick refresh. And go in here and go blank Logic app and go to schedule reoccurrence every 3 minutes, add a new. And so if I want to do something like SQL Server, I can go here to execute a stored procedure. And then, so there's my AD integrated authentication. I can set up that to have that. There was a few other ones, like there is the HTTP one. I've used this one a fair bit because it's one way you can get to Key Vault. But if you go into here, you can see that actually, where did they have that? Actually, authentication. And then the authentication type is managed identity. And you can set that up in there so that it will use the managed identity to call that through. So you could have that maybe calling an API in API management, through with that managed identity. So any of those things that you want to do from that point of view, you can. They are adding more and more of those connectors. I just think I had a list. I thought, let me just have a quick look. Figure out, nah, I've got rid of that screen. But if you just go search for MSI Logic Apps, you'll get a list of the connectors that are using the managed server identity. One thing that's still missing a little bit from functions, and I know they are working on it, is the ability to do things like have your, that's not where I wanted to be. If you have up here and have a queue trigger, instead of this is an HTTP trigger, if you have something like a queue trigger, it's still expecting to have the full connection string set up in the settings. But because now we've got that startup injection piece, they're working on the ability to be able to, in your startup, be able to go out, do your managed service identity, to be able to open up that connection to those things like your storage queues and your SQL and your service bus queues and things like that. Not all that stuff is there yet, but they're working on it. So basically watch this space on that. It basically will help you get rid of all of that stuff in your configuration. What you can do as an alternative is you can go here. Let me just go to this. If you do need a secret in for like your function, and you can go here to your configuration. And to keep from having to put that information in here, you could do say a new application settings, and this would be service bus. And then what you can do is you can do at Microsoft.key vault and give it the details for your key vault and the secret that you want from the key vault. And basically it would pass that through to your application, and it won't be stored anywhere in your configuration or your deployment. All you'll have in your deployment is the name of the key vault and the name of your secret in the key vault. They haven't got this for app configuration yet. There is a feedback item out there that needs some votes to vote this up so they can do a at Microsoft .app config. So that would be a good one also to have in there, to basically be able to go out to the key vault and app settings from here, so you don't have to have anything. And this would cover those situations for your service bus queue triggers and your storage queue triggers, things like that. So let me hop back to the slides. So that's basically the demo I've got there. It's really easy to get started with this. The basic thing is you get rid of secrets in your connection string. So you don't have to worry about that, especially your security people are going to be happier not having to give somebody in the DevOps team or something like that access to those secrets that they need to put them in, configure them in either DevOps or a GitHub pipeline. And so it makes your deployments easier, because you noticed with the use of the managed service identity and the app configuration, I only had two values in my app settings.json. I didn't have to have all of those references in my app settings.json. I only needed my app configuration. So are there any questions? You might want to unmute that mic, David, if you want to. there's any questions.
Any questions? Yep. So when you called SQL Server to get the token,
Yes.
do you need to actually manage locking at that point, so that you're not trying to call and get like, well, you know, if you're trying to do 6 SQL Server calls at the same time, you don't want to be doing 6 calls to get tokens, or does it handle that for you automatically?
And it's actually not calling SQL Server.
Oh, well, calling to get the token anyway.
Yep. So no, it's the logon.microsoft.com that is handling that and can handle 1 billion requests at a second. So
It's just more about the app, because the app will basically stop being able to talk to SQL Server for that amount of time until you've got a valid token. Have you had any issues with that? Or?
No, we've hit this pretty hard, because the number one is I'm caching the token.
Yep.
And if I had like 6 or 8 instances of this going, they would call it once, get a cache token, and just use that token.
Yeah, I was just thinking if you were getting, you know, if you've got a very fast system which has got thousands of clients hitting it all at once, when that token expires, all those 1,000 are going to go and try and request the token all at one time.
Yeah, it just depends on how you're scaling your functions or your web app.
Yeah.
So typically you wouldn't have those all running in one.
It's more of a question for a web app where, you know,
Yep.
It's going to scale a lot higher than, say, an Azure function, which is just going to elastically scale.
Yeah, so it depends on how you've got your web app set up. You could, if you wanted to, you could, you might wrap that in a critical section, but I haven't seen any advice from like the practice team in Microsoft around that. Their example even goes out and gets a token every time.
Okay.
So when you get the token, can you indicate how the expiry for it?
I couldn't hear you.
When you get the token, can you specify the expiry time for it? Or is it a fixed expiry time?
I don't know. I've never tried. Let me just see what the other. No, it's not in the request context. No, I don't see. I don't see an ability at that to do anything around that.
I think that answers my question.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What are the exactly the components of managed service identity? The AD groups or app configuration? What are the components? If I want to set up a managed service identity, where do I have to put in the value?
So basically, you just have to when you create the resource in Azure, you basically need to go in and have the identity property set to true. Okay, and that will create the identity. You will I think that there is some permissions you need in the AD around being able to create application identities. But other than that, you don't need any other permission, because that will create the ID in Active Directory. And then inside of the code, what I did is the ones I had to do were, we look here at the top, the Azure Identity was the one piece that I had to add that allowed me to get the tokens and things like that. Based on that, what is it? The down here in the, it allowed me to get that default Azure credentials. So it doesn't take much to set up. So, and then basically you just go into your individual Azure resources. So if we go back here to so if you look at the service bus namespace, I've got it set up with the role assignment here based on the group. But really what I could do if I wanted to is just add role assignment, service bus data owner, go MSI, function dev. That's my function, and I can save that directly into there. And for some reason this doesn't refresh this. So yeah, so there's my function. So if I wasn't using a group, I could just add it directly to the resources it needed.
Yeah. Pause for that question for you. Any other questions in the room? Any other questions for people online as well? Feel free to, if you've got a question, if we don't hear, or post in the chat. So the people using Azure Functions or Logic Apps at the moment? Yeah. And how are you managing secrets at the moment, just including it in the app settings or in the config in Azure? Or?
Mostly key vault, and then you include the key vault string in the config in the app settings.
Simon?
Yeah, but haven't needed to commit to secrets at this point.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's sort of self-contained.
And I've also got a sample in another project of using this just for a straight web API. So.
All right. Well, if there is any other questions, would you join me in thanking Bill for the presentation?
And if you do think of any other questions, just pass them through. That my Twitter handle's there.